By 1956, the British and French empires were having what you might call a difficult post-war period. They were like aging rock stars still wearing leather pants, desperately trying to convince everyone they could still sell out stadiums. Britain, led by the impeccably tailored but increasingly anxious Anthony Eden, was particularly touchy. Eden had built his entire career on opposing dictators, and he saw them everywhere. It was a political obsession. Meanwhile, France, under Prime Minister Guy Mollet, was wrestling with its own colonial headaches, especially in Algeria, and was in no mood for anyone questioning its global importance. Both nations looked at the Suez Canal, a man-made river in Egypt that they effectively controlled, not just as a shipping lane, but as the last glittering symbol of their world-spanning power. It was their greatest hits album in liquid form. Enter Gamal Abdel Nasser, the charismatic president of Egypt. Nasser was the face of a new idea shaking the globe: post-colonial nationalism. He had big plans for his country, the centerpiece of which was the Aswan High Dam, a mega project to modernize Egypt's economy overnight. To fund this dream, he cleverly played the world's two new sugar daddies, the USA and the Soviet Union, against each other. Washington and London initially agreed to help fund the dam, hoping to keep Nasser out of the Soviet camp. They saw it as a leash. Nasser saw it as a business transaction. This difference in perception would prove to be problematic. The West's patience, however, was thin. Nasser bought weapons from Czechoslovakia, a Soviet bloc country, and formally recognized communist China. In Washington, Secretary of State John Foster Dulles, a man who viewed neutralism as a moral failing, had enough. In July 1956, he didn't just withdraw the funding offer for the dam, he did it in the most publicly humiliating way possible, essentially telling the Egyptian ambassador his country wasn't economically sound. Britain followed suit immediately. They thought this would teach Nasser a lesson that he'd come crawling back. It was a catastrophic misreading of the man, and a beautiful example of what happens when you assume you're the only one in the room with a brain. Nasser did not crawl back. 10 days later, on July 26th, he stood before a massive crowd in Alexandria and gave a fiery 3-hour speech. He recounted every insult, every colonial grievance. Then he casually mentioned the name Ferdinand de Lesseps, the Frenchman who built the canal. This was a pre-arranged code word. As he said it, Egyptian troops moved in and seized the offices of the Suez Canal Company, a corporation owned primarily by British and French shareholders. He declared the canal nationalized, announcing its revenues would pay for the Aswan Dam. In London, when Eden heard the news at a dinner party, he nearly choked on his soup. The world had changed, and he had just been served the bill. Publicly, Britain and France fumed and tried diplomacy. Privately, they started planning something that belongs in a dark comedy. In October 1956, top officials from Britain, France, and Israel met in a secluded villa in Sver, a suburb of Paris. What they cooked up? The Protocol of Sver was a conspiracy of breathtaking audacity. The plan was simple in a convoluted, self-defeating way. Step 1. Israel, which had its own list of grievances with Egypt, would invade the Sinai Peninsula. Step 2. Britain and France would then express grave concern and issue an ultimatum to both Egypt and Israel to withdraw from the Canal Zone to protect international shipping. Step 3. When Egypt, the actual victim, inevitably refused to abandon its own territory, the noble British and French would invade as neutral peacekeepers. It was a plan so so clever you could almost hear it backfiring from 3 weeks away. On October 29th, Israel launched Operation Kadesh, storming into the Sinai. Everything went according to the ridiculous script. The next day, London and Paris issued their phony ultimatum. It was a masterpiece of disingenuous diplomacy, demanding Israeli forces halt 100 miles inside Egypt, while demanding Egyptian forces retreat from their own canal. Nasser obviously told them where to stick their ultimatum. On October 31st, British bombers began pounding Egyptian airfields. The only problem was the main invasion force. It was coming by sea, from Malta, at the majestic speed of a nautical parade. This week-long delay gave the entire world and its various media outlets plenty of time to grab some popcorn and watch the farce unfold in slow motion. There was one person who was not amused. U.S. President Dwight D. Eisenhower. He was in the final week of his re-election campaign, running on a platform of peace and prosperity. He found out about the invasion not from his closest allies, but from news reports. He was furious. Not necessarily for moral reasons, but because his so-called friends had started a war and lied to his face right before an election. His reaction was swift and brutal. He didn't send troops, he made a phone call. The U.S. Treasury was ordered to start selling its massive holdings of British government bonds. This wasn't a military threat, it was a financial execution. It would trigger a catastrophic run on the pound sterling and vaporize the British economy. The empire's jugular vein, it turned out, was not in Suez, but on Wall Street. Back in London, the Chancellor, Harold Macmillan, did the math and realized they were hours from total financial collapse. He informed Eden that the game was up. On November 6th, with their troops barely 23 miles into Egypt, Britain and France agreed to a humiliating ceasefire. They had failed to seize the canal, failed to topple Nasser, and succeeded only in proving their own impotence on the world stage without American permission. Anthony Eden's health, already fragile, conveniently collapsed. He resigned a few weeks later, officially for medical reasons, which is the political equivalent of your dog eating your homework. To clean up the mess, the UN created its first ever armed peacekeeping force, a concept literally invented on the fly to get the British and French to go home without completely losing face. The Suez Crisis was over, and the results were brutally clear. Nasser, who had been militarily defeated, emerged as the undisputed political victor and a hero across the Arab world. The canal remained firmly in Egyptian hands. Britain and France, meanwhile, had their imperial illusions shattered in the most public way imaginable. They learned the hard way that they were now junior partners in a world run by Washington and Moscow. The Soviet Union even got to play world leader, threatening to drop nuclear rockets on London and Paris, which was mostly bluster but sounded terrifying at the time. The crisis definitively marked the end of Britain's role as a global superpower, and the moment the United States became the uncontested leader of the Western world. It wasn't a transition, it was an amputation. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more historical insights. Thanks for watching, nerds!